A lot of us want to get into reading, fiction, non-fiction, or some form of reading as adults, but there are these myths, the mental blocks, and a lot of things that we tell ourselves that stop us from reading. So what I did is, spoke to a couple of my friends, spoke to folks who want to get into reading, and kind of distilled around 7 myths or 7 mental blocks that stop us from reading. So without much further ado, let's go. Myth number 1, I have to read serious stuff. So when I spoke to a couple of my friends, all of them told me that, hey Praveen, you know what, you need some help with productivity or spirituality or building habits and things like that. So you're reading things that you want, but I really don't find like I vibe well with non-fiction books and things like that, right? So friends, this is the first myth that I wanted to break is, you need not always read serious stuff, right? So you could read anything that you want. It could be politics, it could be your daily newspaper, it could be economics, it could be your favorite subject from school, it could be cars, motorbikes, name any subject. There are tons of books or articles or /PDFs that are written around that subject, right? So you do you. So don't kind of box yourself to say, hey, because the social media is telling me something, or because the YouTubers are telling me something, or because book recommendations or the library has certain kind of books, I should restrict myself to these kind of books, right? You could read anything and everything, because anything that has to be said in the world has ever been told is always in the form of a book. So you do read about subjects that you feel very, very interested about, and don't be compelled by what people around you, what social media, or what things around you are pointing you to read about. Myth number 2, you have to read for long periods of time. So this was brought up by a very, very close friend of mine who I have been nudging to get into reading, and the number one thing that he told me was, Praveen, you know what, I want to read, but the moment I read for like a couple of minutes, I quickly get distracted, and he has a kid as well. So he goes to attend the kid, or he is onto social media, or he goes and attends Slack ping and things like that. So, since I can't read for a long period of time, I don't think I need to read. I don't think I want to read itself, right? Friends, let me tell you something, I count myself as one of the people who reads regularly on great days. And when I say great days, it's like I feel my absolute best in the morning. I end up reading for 30 to 40 minutes. This is on a great day. But on other days, I read for 15 to 20 minutes in the morning, maybe 15 to 20 minutes in the evening, and those are days where I have a really light day at work and with other chores at home. If not, 20 to 25 minutes is what I read in the morning, and that's it. And all the reviews that I do now is based on the books that I read in the morning for 20 to 25 minutes. So you need not have an extended period of time to read. And a year and a half back, my reading time used to be 10 minutes, right? 10 to 15 minutes at the maximum. So I slowly built that up to around 25 minutes now. But when I started out 2-3 years back, I used to have the same problem. But you just have to stick with that habit for long enough, and you will slowly see those increments in your reading time or your focus time coming along. It's not going to magically happen, because I acknowledge that we are all constantly distracted, and getting back your focus is going to take that time. So don't box yourself thinking that, oh, I have to read for long periods of time for me to be a good reader. Even 5 minutes a day is a great start, because currently you might not even be reading. Myth number 3, you have to remember everything that you read, right? So this is one of my favorite things, because it used to slow down a lot of things that I used to read. Because what used to happen is, a lot of non-fiction books, in its essence, the core of the book will come in 2 or 3 chapters. And as someone who studied in school and who's used to memorizing a lot of things, for me, reading as a conditioning was to remember everything that I read, right? So I used to take diligent notes, I used to prepare a PDF and things like that. But over time, I realized that it increased my resistance to read, right? So now what I do, hey, I don't make an effort to remember everything that I read, but I think about one lesson that I can implement in my everyday life, because I predominantly read non-fiction, right? So if you're into fiction, or if you're into reading something else, kudos to you. So don't force yourself or condition yourself to remember everything that you read, because when you are reading in volumes, you need not remember everything, right? Because your brain has the superpower of connecting different things. For example, a lot of the words that I use are picked up from the books that I speak. For example, a lot of things that I write, unconsciously I use the words that authors have used. So I'm sure that is going to be the same for you. So don't beat yourself if you don't remember a lot of things that you read, or you forget the author's name, or you forget the main lessons from that book, the most important thing is just because I would challenge you to question, hey, do you remember every reel that you see, or do you remember every article that you ever read on the internet, or do you even remember every conversation that you had with your better half or your friends? No, right? So treat reading as a hobby, and I am sure with time you will start enjoying it. So don't force yourself to remember everything. Myth number 4, you have to read books end to end. This conditioning comes from, again, two aspects. One is where we are conditioned in school to read the entire book, at least from where I come in India. What happens is we are forced to read all the chapters to ensure that you're increasing the probability of getting a higher mark, and that has translated to our book reading as well, right? And we also pay money to buy these books. So we always carry this sense of guilt, or we carry this sense of a huge heavy feeling that, oh my god, if I'm not completing this book, I don't feel great about it. Oh my god, if I don't remember things from this book, I don't feel great about it. Let me tell you something, friends. The moment you force yourself to complete a book, or for that matter force yourself to do any activity, you will ensure that you start hating that activity immediately. So my recommendation is, start reading these books like a blog post. So, what do you do when you read a long blog post? So you just try to skim through it at first to see, okay, hey, does it add value, or does it, tell me any new information that I don't know? And if you feel like, okay, you come to the fifth paragraph and you realize that you don't understand, then you go to the third paragraph and you realize, okay, maybe there is some context, you start reading it from the start. So start treating books very, very similarly, right? And especially if you're reading a lot of things from a singular genre, you will realize that your speed of reading just multiplies with time. So don't force yourself to read a book end to end unless you find it interesting, because it's the author's responsibility, it's the book's responsibility to ensure that it keeps you engaged. So look at, and at times what happens, at least for me, is the bestsellers that some of the YouTubers recommend or I see on Goodreads doesn't hold my attention, and I quit that without any guilt, right? There are certain books that I have finished in like a day. There are certain books that elongates the number of days that I spend in. So it is totally dependent on person to person. So don't force yourself or box yourself to say, oh my god, okay, I have to finish this book. Quit books, like no one's business if you don't find it interesting. Fifth one, you have to read bestsellers, right? So this is very similar to the first one that we spoke, where today's day of social media, recommendation engines are tuned to show more of the content that you're very, very interested in, right? For example, you take the booktuber community on YouTube, or the Instagram, Bookstagram if it's called, or any other platform. You will see the same 25 to 30 non-fiction books. You will see the same 20 to 30 fiction books that are being recommended. Obviously, there are exceptions to this rule, but broadly, I could categorize all the books that are recommended. The popular books would be 50 on Instagram and probably another 50 on YouTube, and there will be a good overlap of 30 to 35 books between these two platforms. So what ends up happening is, as a reader who's someone who's just getting started, you're always made to feel that you're left behind if you're not reading these classics, if you're not reading these bestsellers, or if you're not reading the books that are being recommended on these platforms. Yes, I don't have anything against these books, but if these books don't align with the interest that you have, the need that you have, or if it doesn't pique your interest at this point of time, it's absolutely okay to not read those bestsellers, or not find the bestsellers interesting, right? So it's absolutely okay if you if there is a book that everyone is recommending and you read a couple of chapters and you don't find it interesting. It's absolutely okay to put that down, because a lot of friends that I know force themselves to read a book that because everyone is recommending that. They read it for a few chapters, they don't find it interesting, but they force themselves to finish that because of the social pressure and because of the need to talk in a social setting about that book and things like that. So never do that, especially with bestsellers, right? It's a bestseller for a reason, because a lot of people like it, but if you don't like it, there is no pressure for you to complete it or read those books. Myth number 6, right? You feel overwhelmed with a lot of information. Friends, this is something that's very dear to me, and I do acknowledge being overwhelmed with books or the recommendations is a real thing. So I would recommend starting very, very small. So start with the easiest book. So just because you're an adult now, it doesn't mean you can't read children's books, or just because you're an adult doesn't mean you can't read graphic novels and things like that. So don't start very, very heavy, because the mistake a lot of people do is they start with a really well-researched book, or a very fat book that is very dense in terms of its information and things like that. and they end up not completing the book, or they end up feeling a bit overwhelmed. So start with easy books, start with things that you like, and the habit will take care of itself. The seventh and the final lesson is only non-fiction or only reading can make you better. This has been a big pet peeve for me, because as someone who started with a fiction, I used to read a lot of crime thrillers back in the day, and I started my non-fiction because at this point of time in my life, I feel I need a lot of help from these a lot of non-fiction books. For example, now I have started switching between fiction and non-fiction. For every 2 books of non-fiction I read, I end up reading 1 fiction, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to read only non-fiction to get better, or you only have to read to get better. Even if you read non-fiction, you will get better only if you apply those lessons to real life, right? Just reading doesn't make you better. Similarly, if you're reading fiction, only if you're making some amount of conscious effort to replicate the language, replicate the storytelling style to real life, or whatever lessons you choose to implement in your life, is how you get better, not just by reading. So just get over the myth that non-fiction is the only one that you need to read, or fiction is for very goofy stuff and things like that. Only reading doesn't get you anywhere. So I hope I have covered most of the common myths / mental blockers that you have around reading, and hopefully I have been given you that extra nudge to get started with reading. Do let me know if you have any other myths that you want me to speak about. I would love to do a part 2 of this video. Until I see you in the next one, this is Praveen Ramesh signing off.